So welcome to our next session on the art of the possible. First, we're going to start off with some predictive modeling using CUTRIC's trademarked Rout predictive modeling tool for electric buses and fuel cell buses. You'll note from the title of this presentation, we originally planned to present to you 3 systems that we had modeled out, but due to the COVID-19 crisis, 2 of those systems, we weren't sure if we would have a chance to present them at Town Council or City Council before the conference today. And in fact, it did turn out that at least one presentation has been delayed to several months from now. So we're not going to be presenting those results because we have to obviously present them to the City Council before we present them to the world. Instead, what we're going to do is focus in on the modeling from Riverside Transit Agency, which we have presented to Council in the community of Riverside in California. And with us today, we're going to have my colleague Parvati Pillai, who is our Rout program manager and our research manager at CUTRIC. She's going to take you through that research, that modeling work. And following that, we're going to check in with Kristen Warsinski, who is the Director of Planning for Riverside Transit Agency. We've had the great pleasure of working with Kristen and her team at Riverside. Just a fantastic group to work with in terms of working through all the ins and outs of how to electrify a system that's situated in California, where you really don't have a choice because of the CARB regulation. It's not a if and when and how should we, it's a we must do it, and so we need to figure it out. We have an opportunity to deep dive with Kristen. She has a huge amount of insights to provide. So to kick things off, I'm going to turn it over to you, Parvati, to kick off the modeling. The show is over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Josipa. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Parvati Pillai, and as Josipa introduced, I work as a project manager for zero emission bus simulation and commercialization at CUTRIC. It's my absolute pleasure to be having this opportunity to show you what our predictive modeling results using our trademarked modeling tool, Rout, is showing for RTA, Riverside Transit Agency. So as Josipa mentioned, this is a Canadianized version of the board presentation that we did to the RTA board on February 27th of 2020. So you would see a condensed version of that presentation, and clearly it is anonymized to protect our confidentiality and proprietary interest. So over to the presentation, I would like to first of all start by telling you a little bit about our Rout modeling methodology. And as you would see, there are 4 key aspects to it: the GIS modeling, duty cycle generation, BEB or hydrogen modeling, and the charging schedule analysis. So I would like to start off with the GIS modeling part, which is our first aspect of the study for any predictive modeling project that we undertake. So we do look at the actual traffic conditions that a bus would go through, the traffic impediments, the transit schedule, the GTFS data that is provided by the agency, along with the non-revenue miles that a bus in a real-life situation passes through, to actually generate a route profile for an individual route or a block. And that's our key output from the GIS modeling work, which is actually geospatial data in tabular format that feeds into our next aspect of the study, which is the duty cycle generation. So in duty cycle generation piece, we look at seasonal variations involved. So we have like heavy winter conditions in Canada, for example, in California, that may not be the case. So we do look at the seasonal variations and the resultant cabin heating or cooling requirements that are placed on the battery. We also look at the ridership scenario. So typically we work with transit agencies who provide us their actual ridership data, which we utilize directly in our modeling. So if they provide the maximum ridership, we use the maximum value for our absolute worst case scenario modeling, like heavy duty cycle. We use half of that for our medium duty cycle. There are 3 duty cycles: light, medium, and heavy. Light duty assumes that there are no passengers on board. It's the best case scenario in terms of energy utilization. The bus just exits the garage, follows the speed profile or speed limits on the road, and then doesn't use any auxiliary load, doesn't have any passengers on board, and it actually utilizes the minimum possible amount of energy. Whereas in the medium duty, it is 50% passenger load, 50% auxiliary load, and in heavy duty, it's at absolute maximum at 100%. So that duty cycle is generated in the 3 scenarios, which get pumped into the next phase, which is the BEB or hydrogen fuels and electric bus modeling. So in doing this analysis, we use our Rout modeling algorithm, which is based in Python. We look at different OEM specifications that are systematically and progressively updated and collected from our member and non-member OEMs. So In terms of some of the key elements that we look at are the weight of the bus, the auxiliary heating draws from the battery, the AC draws. Some agencies would want us to consider diesel heater incorporation, which we do for the winter conditions. We look at the motor efficiency, the battery sizes involved, etc., in generating the performance modeling predictively for each of the models and makes of the buses that we look at. And the fourth and the final piece that we do in a phase one analysis is the charging schedule analysis. So we look at the demand charges, the volumetric charges that a transit agency would have to incur when they are deploying these battery electric buses, and we do look at their traffic schedule to see what kind of downtime would there be possible for them to accommodate an in-depot charging as well as opportunity charging. We do look at the charger information to do in-depot charging as well as opportunity charging, depending on the scope that is agreed to by the transit agency. So in the case of RTA, we would look at both opportunity charging and in-depot charging, and we would see the reasons for doing so in the following slides. But before I do really want to drive your attention to this slide, which is talking about the non-revenue distances. So in the case of RTA, there are two types of blocks: DO blocks, directly operated, and contractually obligated or cutaway blocks. So in this particular presentation, I'm sharing with you the DO blocks in the weekday scenario, and this slide is basically showing all a subsection of the blocks that we work with. So RTA has, as any other transit agency, several hundreds of blocks, and we looked at a subset of them in this particular slide here, block ID being represented on the x-axis and non-revenue distances in kilometers on the y-axis. So that bold orange ribbon that you see through the slide is basically showing where the majority of the non-revenue distances for RTA lies, between that 24 to 43 kilometer mark. It's not the absolute highest that we see in the case of our modeling experience. It's not the lowest either. So we have seen a range of non-revenue distances in our analysis, and RTA shows 24 to 43 as the average, majority being in that range. So this slide is basically showing furthermore a description about the non-revenue block assignment. So in doing our Rout modeling, we do typically look at the non-revenue distance profiles that are provided by the transit agencies if they have it. But in most cases, those agencies that are relying on fossil fuel powered fleet typically would not have a lot of data on non-revenue distances in terms of the exact routes or the blocks that the driver has to take when pulling out from the garage, doing interlining, or going back to the garage, which may mean that CUTRIC has to creatively design non-revenue blocks, which we can combine with the revenue blocks to create the route profile for each of the blocks that the transit agency has. So in doing so, we do look at the pull-out, the pull-in, and the deadheading involved. For RTA, there were 137 DO blocks that we looked at. So you would see that we creatively designed 8 non-revenue blocks at CUTRIC from A to H, and respective lengths of non-revenue routes associated with each of them are listed in the table on the top right-hand side. And the descriptive statistics table that you see below that is basically the information that we received from RTA, and it shows that the maximum amount of deadheading that RTA has, or non-revenue distances that RTA would have, is around 120 kilometers, and the minimum is around 4 kilometers. So from an energy consumption predictive modeling standpoint, it's really critical to look at the non-revenue distances, because if you're looking at an energy dense fossil fuel like diesel or CNG, this value wouldn't matter that much or are not really considered. But when you look at like an expensive non-energy dense molecule like electron, it becomes far more important. That's why we do combine the revenue and non-revenue distances in our analysis. So this is basically showing an example of a route profile for two buses, two vehicles, basically bus number 115 and bus number 1001. So you would see the frequency of different impediments listed on the y-axis, with the two buses listed on the x-axis in two different colors with the impediments noted. So you would see the bus stop, the traffic light, stop sign, pedestrian crossing, unique bus stops, number of trips, etc. shown in this particular graph. So we do have separate formats for all our blocks, all our vehicles that we model, but this is an example of the two vehicles that we looked at. So going into the next phase of the analysis, which is duty cycle generation. So 3 duty cycles, light, medium, and heavy duty cycle was generated for all blocks and days at RTA, so weekday, Saturday, and Sunday. So over the during the weekday cycle, we observed that there were 214 blocks, and over the 3 duty cycles, we had 642 duty cycles. Similar format is observed in the case of Saturday and Sunday. We obtained passenger loading data from RTA, which were used for the medium and heavy duty cycles for each block. We used the 100% of that value for the heavy duty cycle, 50% was used for the medium duty scenario. So this is again showing 2 examples of blocks that we modeled for RTA, and the graphs show basically the topographies for the 2 blocks listed. So the right hand side shows block number 5012 for RTA, and as you can see, there is one route associated with it with 3 shapes associated. There are 8 bus stops and 8 traffic impediments. This is a 15-kilometer long route with an operation time of 1.5 hours. On the left hand side, you see another block 20,602. You'd see that there are 2 shapes associated with that particular route, typically peak and non-peak. There are 8 bus stops, but it is a far longer route because it's almost 127 kilometers in revenue, operating under 2.5 hours. So it's basically showing the distinction between 2 blocks on the extreme ends, like a shorter and the longer route, and how we classify their attributes. So if we go into some examples of the duty cycle, so we have listed the example of block 5012 in this particular case, and it's in the medium duty cycle that I'm observing this result. So you would see 4 graphs in this pane, and I would start with that one on the top left hand side. It's a speed profile. So you would see the speed in kilometer per hour listed on the y-axis and the simulated time in minute on the x-axis. So in 30 minutes of operation, we see that this bus goes from 0 to almost 65 kilometer per hour, and it does a lot of stopping and starting. So typically it may be doing that to collect the passengers, and it's probably a downtown environment that this bus is operating under. And the distance profile is further attesting that scenario, because we are only seeing a total of around 15 kilometers traveled during the 30-minute window. The elevation profile, which is the graph that you see on the left-hand side on the bottom, is actually showing what kind of elevation is this bus going through. Is it block going through? Basically, you would see that it's from around 250 meters above sea level to around 275 meters above sea level. Not a substantial hill or anything, but there is still an incline that gets reflected in the energy profile. The grade also shows some degree of undulation, some degree of changing from around -10% to almost 15%. So this has impacts in energy analysis as well as regenerative braking for this particular BEB models that we look at. So if we look at a medium duty example for the second block that we showed as an example in the earlier slide, block 20,602, you would see the same 4 graphs in this pane, but the speed profile is quite a lot different, because you would see that the speed almost goes to 100 kilometer per hour, showing that this is not a downtown route. This is rather a freeway route, and it is a substantially long route as well, almost 125 kilometer plus in the around the 120 minute mark, almost 2 hours mark. You would see the elevation profile is also showing some substantial degree of change, and the grade profile is also reflecting some undulation. So this is an example of a medium duty scenario for a block 20,602, which is a considerably longer block. Okay, so those are the examples of duty cycles that I showed. So we just shared a medium duty example for 2 blocks, but when you actually look at the duty cycles, we would be showing the light, medium, and heavy duty scenarios, which the changes noted in each of the case. But because the presentation is a lot condensed, we only shared the medium duty cycle. But if you do require any further details, please do contact us. So there have been multiple models, bus models utilized in this analysis, but I'm typically showing you one battery electric bus model and one fuel cell electric model. The results are anonymized, so we are not disclosing the name of the provider here. The battery electric bus had a battery capacity of 400 plus kilowatt hour, and the fuel cell electric bus used in this analysis had a 50 plus kilowatt hour fuel cell on it with a hydrogen fuel cell tank capable of carrying around 30 to 40 kilogram of hydrogen. It also had a battery at 90 plus kilowatt hour capacity. So let's see what the results are for this. So in the case of depot charging only, we are expecting that this bus would be leaving the depot fully charged, and it doesn't have any opportunity to get recharged over the course of its travel or its trip. So in the medium and heavy duty scenario, we are observing an energy efficiency around 1.28 kilowatt hour per kilometer in the weekday scenario, which actually is much more when you look at the heavy duty cycle. Almost 1.81 kilowatt hour gets required per kilometer in the heavy duty scenario. So this bus is not getting charged, and so this basically tells you what kind of a range we are looking at for this particular bus, because it has a battery capacity of 400 plus kilowatt hour only. So this slide is basically showing you the success rate. So y-axis shows the success rate in percentage, and the x-axis is basically showing weekday, Saturday, and Sunday cases for medium and heavy duty scenario. So on a typical weekday, if you look at the depot charging only, you would find that in the case of RTA, only at 25% of the fleet can be successfully electrified using depot charging only. And we are using the criteria that the state of charge dropping below 20% after completing a block as the criteria for determining whether or not that particular bus was successful in completing it. So you would see that the almost 3/4 of the fleet remains unelectrified or unsuccessfully electrified if we are relying on depot charging only, which opens up the avenue to ask what next, what can we do to better it. So this is again showing a range analysis. So this is basically telling you what kind of range can you expect from a weekday, a heavy and weekday medium scenario. Total available battery capacity divided by the energy efficiency value tells you that almost 300 kilometer range is available for the majority of your blocks on a weekday medium scenario. But in the heavy duty case, it substantially drops to almost 200 kilometer only. Okay, so in the case of depot charging, we saw there was only 25% success. But if we are incorporating opportunity charging, and based on RTA's request, we did look at two scenarios. Based on the downtime, you can look at multiple scenarios, but we did look at the 5-minute and 6-minute scenario. So 5-minute per round trip, we are using a charger efficiency of 91% for a 400 plus kilowatt charger. You would see that there is a substantial jump in the success rate for the medium duty cycle. Almost 70% of RTA's fleet can be successfully electrified if we are introducing an opportunity charging for 5-minute per round trip. In the case of 6-minute round trip, wherein two chargers are used for 3-minute per single trip, we get a 10% increase. So 80% of the fleet can be successfully electrified using this scenario. So you would see that, okay, the opportunity charging isn't solving our problems completely. So let's look at fuel cell analysis. So fuel cell electric buses in the medium and heavy duty scenario, we are observing that almost 12 kilometers can be covered per kilogram of hydrogen if we are in the medium duty cycle on a weekday. But in the heavy duty cycle, it drops substantially to almost 8 and 8.5 kilometer per kilogram. So similar to what we did for the depot as well as opportunity charging, if you look at the fuel cell analysis in terms of success rates for the DO blocks, you would see that on weekday, our success rate is almost 82%, and Saturday and Sunday, it's 91 and 92%. So for an agency like RTA, what this is telling us is that exclusively one solution wouldn't solve all the electrification needs, and you would need to look at like a transportation system energy overhaul, including fuel cell electric buses, battery electric buses, to actually resolve all the issues. And some of those resolutions might mean like adjusting the schedule, increasing the downtime, or a system-wide deployment of opportunity charges. With that, I would like to thank all for tuning into this presentation, and please raise any questions that you may have in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parvati. A whirlwind tour, as we usually do, in terms of a deep dive analysis. We know we provide a lot of information there. And just clarify one little item that I saw pop up, that the way that success is defined for the battery electric vehicles and for the fuel cell bus electric vehicles is when the state of charge drops below 20% state of charge. So in case you missed that, it was there on the slide. That's how we defined a successful run across the block. So thank you very much, Parvati. A treasure trove of knowledge there. And with that, we're going to turn over to Kristen Warsinski because, of course, Kristen, a lot of this research, well, all of the research was done for the purposes of Riverside Transit in order to help your agency convert to full fleet electrification. So we're going to turn to you, Kristen, for an introductory overview of RTA about what you need to do in your fleet. And then we're going to start off with the questions that have started to come in already. So I suspect we'll run out of time on queries. So we'll move to you first for that introductory contextual commentary.
Great, thank you. Just a few slides to briefly review, just to let everyone know a little bit more about Riverside Transit Agency, or RTA. We are a joint powers agency. We were established in 1975 and we started service in 1977. Our service area is uniquely large, 2,500 square miles. If you're from Canada, that's over 6,400 square kilometers. I've been doing math all morning listening to Canada Properties talk, so I'm sure you're doing the reverse, so I thought I would do it for you. But we cover 2,500 square miles of Western Riverside County. We have 22 member jurisdictions, 18 incorporated cities, and then supervisorial districts 1, 2, 3, and 5. Under normal service, so pre-COVID service, we would run 334 buses. We have 38 fixed routes, 1 rapid link route, 8 commuter routes that connect with other nearby counties. We have dial-a-ride service provided by another 110 buses, which is the curb-to-curb service for seniors over 65 and disabled. So RTA has some unique attributes and challenges that we've been having to look at as we've looked at changing to a zero-emission fleet. One of the main ones being our large service area again, and trying to figure out what technology or mix of technologies will work for us in order to continue to provide that essential service throughout the county, but knowing that the range limitations are there at this point for zero emission. And we currently run all CNG. We've been running all CNG since 2001, and it works really well for our large service area. We don't really run into those issues with range, so that has been a challenge. Our commuter link routes are very large. Most of them are over 100 miles in one round trip. So when you combine that into a block, there would be a serious need for charging if it was electrified, and even a need to top off fueling if we went hydrogen. I think you saw there on the slides that Prabhathi showed that there are some routes where even with hydrogen it wouldn't work. We would have to do some fueling. Our fixed routes, our longest fixed route is 89 miles round trip. So even that is really long for a fixed route. So those are some of the challenges that we have. We also have challenging topography. You know, if we're traveling from Riverside County to Orange County, we have a route that goes from San Bernardino County to Orange County through Riverside. And that takes you all the way to sea level. Not so bad on the way down on a zero emission vehicle, but coming back up, it presents quite a challenge. So that's something that CUTRIC helped us look at and understand. We also have different divisions that we run our service out of. We have some of our buses out of Riverside, some out of Hemet, and then we also have contract ops service that comes out of Paris. And we have some deadhead challenges associated with the locations of our garages and where some of these routes have to start. So that's something else we had to think about. You know, is the bus going to be half out of energy by the time it gets to the start of the route? Those are kinds of things that we had to look at. On top of all of that, the state of California, or CARB, the California Resource Board, passed their ICT regulation in 2019, saying that all transit agencies are mandated to move to a zero-emission fleet by 2040. RTA is considered a large transit agency under that regulation. Anything over 100 buses, anyone who runs over 100 buses is a large agency, so we are bound by those requirements. So starting in 2023, anytime we purchase buses, we have to buy 25% zero emission, and zero emission for them is either electric or hydrogen fuel cell. Those are the two options. And then it ramps up from there, and by 2029, anytime you're purchasing buses, you have to purchase 100%. Where that becomes even more of a challenge for RTAs because of our large service area. We put miles on buses. They reach their useful life and mileage well before they do in years, which makes our replacement schedule a bit more rapid. In fact, when we go to apply sometimes for federal funding for buses, we have to remind them that our service area is so huge that the miles that we're putting on our vehicles happens a bit more quickly than the average transit agency. So our replacement schedule is ramped up a little bit. And then we are also working on submitting a rollout plan to CARB. CARB actually, because of the COVID pandemic, allowed for agencies to, they allowed agencies some time to figure out their rollout plans because it's hard to have board meetings or get, our contractors are in Canada, a few of them are. We can't have in-person meetings right now because of the pandemic. So they've afforded us a little bit of room to getting our rollout plan submitted. We look forward to going back to our board with everything that we've learned from CUTRIC and from Stantec and make some suggestions as far as what types of technology we think would work. And then we're going to look to our board to set a policy on what they want to do moving forward. And that's, I think all I have. That's a little bit about RTA, and I'll turn it back to you, Josipa.
That's fantastic. Thanks for setting the scene, Kristen. And actually, you've really set it up quite nicely. So Parvati, thanks again for your insights. We're going to go now to the fireside chat with yourself, Kristen, and we're going to go right into some of the questions that segue off of what you just ended on. Now, I'll note that several folks had questions about the Rout tool, and I'm going to ask if you do have those questions, get a hold of us about whether it can be licensed. It's a not-for-profit tool. It's meant to help transit agencies, and we are working with the government to try and figure out a way to offer to all Canadian transit and beyond for an apples to apples comparative methodology that's easy and trustworthy. So get a hold of us and we're happy to provide those pieces of information to you about that tool and about the modeling work. But we're going to go right into the lessons learned from Riverside Transit. And one of the things you ended on, Kristen, was the fact that CARB's given you a little bit of leeway. For those folks who aren't familiar, I think most folks on the line, well, I know they are Canadian or American, but we've got a lot of European and some Asian, North African participants here today as well. And so for those folks who aren't as familiar with CARB, it's the California Air Resources Board. And of course, in California, it's mandated, as you said, Kristen, that zero emissions is the way of the future. So you really don't have a choice. And that might actually be a healthy thing for the environment. But given that that's the case, even with the COVID extension, could you give us some insight into is CARB's requirement feasible for all transit? And if it is feasible or if it's not feasible, what is the variability from small to large systems? What are some of the supports you'd like to see in place, in fact, to make sure that CARB's regulatory targets can be met without causing chaos on the transit side? Because all of this stuff is really complex.
Yeah. So for us, the challenge is going to be on the cost side. The capital costs, and trying not to lose those essential routes that we have that go to some of the further distances in our county. Those routes are there for a reason. They're necessary for the people that live in those areas. And for instance, just going to electric, we would be cutting. We would be forced to cut a lot of things or reroute and restructure and go out there very limited times throughout the day. So there's some limitations there. As far as CARB's timeline, it's aggressive. And from a financial standpoint, I think where we stand is that we would hope that there's going to be some future incentives and grant programs to help us afford. This is a system overhaul. It's redoing the way that RTA delivers transit. It's rethinking how we're structuring our blocks and, where to put this infrastructure and do we have room to put this infrastructure in. So any financial assistance that we can get is going to be crucial. I think that meeting with other transit agencies and trying to learn from especially people as close as Sunline and OCTA, we look forward to working with them and learning from them as they've already started to use the technology. I think that will be important. The timeline's aggressive, but the air quality in California is such that this is what's been deemed as necessary. And And while we know that our CNG buses are low-no, we're moving towards the low-no CNGs, and they're fairly clean, and we've been running them for a long time. We were one of the first ones to start running them. If this is what the regulations say to do, then we're going to have to figure out how to phase it in.
Yeah, and I mean, as we've said before as well, there's no point kicking and screaming and sitting down and crying and saying it can't be done. I mean, the climate needs it, air quality locally needs it, healthcare needs it. And so really it's on us as a transit industry to roll up our sleeves and figure out how to get there, but recognizing the complexities of it. And that does lead to a question about your CNG experience, which you just alluded to a moment ago. The fact that so many Californian agencies have compressed natural gas, and they had to go through that not 10 years ago approximately or so. That was a major overhaul from diesel to compressed natural gas. And some people have drawn parallels between that experience and this one. Could you give us a sense of how well prepared are you because of compressed natural gas overhaul? To what extent is this overhaul to electrification, whether hydrogen or battery electric, a repeat of the past? So you've been here before and you can repeat some of the knowledge or at least the cultural experience of an overhaul. And to what extent is it fundamentally different? That there's just not a lot you can draw from the CNG past into this future electric?
I think it depends on the technology that our board decides to go with. And I think Lauren alluded to this perfectly in the Sunline presentation that she did earlier, but if we're going to hydrogen, there are a lot of parallels and a lot of similarities between the technology and CNG and hydrogen. And so for our staff, it wouldn't be as big of a change, although there still would be differences. It wouldn't be as bad as an electric or a mixed fleet where you're introducing an entire new technology and a new, way of doing things. But I think that all in all, RTA staff they're innovative, and they're always willing to accept challenges and to figure out ways to do things. The team is, extremely resilient when it comes to that. And I really believe that doing a past conversion of their fleet only adds to their knowledge of all the different levels that we need to look at. You're looking at everything from your blocking and your run cuts and your rollout plans to your mechanics to the logistics of where you're placing this infrastructure. And it's just an overhaul of the entire agency. But I think that the staff is flexible enough and project managers have past experience with making this type of change. So in that way, I think it's certainly going to help.
So an innovative culture and drawing a little bit from the past in terms of that innovation. And it reflects what was said in the panel just before us, which is transit is at the forefront of innovation and technology. It's no longer just, deploying and operating a service. It's actually being technology innovators and driving a whole industry around that. So that leads to a question about where are the blocks? Like there's the will, we want to do this, and it's good for the environment, good for the air, and you have an innovative transit system. But from your experience right now, one of the questions is, what are the physical blocks that you're facing that, you just can't change? Like how much real estate and how many buses you can fit at your depot, or how much fuel, and whether you can partner with OCTA and Sunline in a fueling conglomeration. What are some of the physical or realistic concrete blocks that you're facing that you think are going to guide the decision, regardless of whether it pushes you in the direction of the best technology or not?
I think some of the things that you just listed, from what we can see from our studies that Stantec and CUTRIC has done, when it comes down to costs, it's fairly close for us because of the number of extra vehicles we would need to run electric and the amount of on-route charging that we would have to deploy to make it feasible. It comes down to a point where cost-wise, that's going to be a big driving part of the decision, I think, as far as to what we do with our technology. Another thing is when you think about operations for us, right now we have the luxury of that. A bus is a bus is a bus, right? If we can put any bus on any route, and that would not be the case if RTA chose to do a mixed fleet. We would have limitations. And then looking at things like we have guidelines from the FTA that says we can only have a 20% spare ratio, but if we're having electric buses, we have to change them out more frequently. It would need to be higher. So there's a roadblock there. Will they let us have more buses to deploy this new technology? And the federal government, as it stands right now, is not quite in line with California as far as emission reductions and technology from that standpoint. So that would be another challenge that we're going to face.
Mm-hmm. So then that leads into a question that's coming up around the politics of the situation. And this is a more sensitive question, but I suppose I'll generalize it because it's a difficult place transit agencies operate in. Not just federally or state-wise, but even locally. What are some of the ongoing political challenges you see ahead? I mean, California's, driven its political stake in the ground in terms of its emission status. Come what may, the federal government has a particular position on it with an election looming. But municipally, what are still some of the questions you're hearing at the local political level that, you think the agency could address, could help to overcome, but are still constituting perhaps, if not opposition, just maybe non-knowledge of the requirements ahead?
I don't think we've had some comments in the past there. We definitely have some jurisdictions who are on board with CNG and who don't quite see the need or feel the need to go to electric. But in general, RTA, I try to stay out of the politics of it. I'm a public administrator, and it's not my job to set the policy. It's my job to implement what was said. And right now, CARB has set a regulation that RTA has to implement regardless of the political environment or what may happen. Now I could see, and we've had some questions from some board members at board meetings of why are we doing this? And it's because it's the regulation. We're implementing what we've been told to implement. So regardless of politics, that's the policy right now for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to be fair, as you've noted, there's a requirement to go that way. But our experience at CUTRIC, in my experience personally, is that the more we get out to city councils and to commissions and to boards, and the more we just talk through the technology, the more people come along, because a lot of times opposition or resistance to electrification or zero emissions future just comes from just not knowing the technology. And that is fair because, people are people, they only know what they hear. And so if we can get out and we can help educate people, then we find that the politics disappears and it's just about community building. And most people start to understand it. And I think that that's probably the case in most of the communities across Canada and the United States combined.
Yeah, I mean, you were at our board meeting. I don't think politics really came up. I mean, they were more interested in learning the technology and understanding what the future looks like for RTA than anything.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great example of the fact that, especially at the municipal regional level, regardless of political stripe, people are in the business of trying to build community. And if you can give people the tools to build community, then they're quite keen to use those tools to build the community in the best way they see fit. And I think we saw that in Riverside in particular. So this then leads to the difficulties, a question about the difficulties your community is going to face. And we've asked a few other folks about this earlier today in the panels, but we are living within this COVID context. We're also living within a context of ridership dropping off, fares dropping off, an uncertain economic recovery ahead. And then layer on top of it all the social protests and all of the division in communities cropping up in terms of the need that certain communities have to receive transit. It's not like we can just stop delivering transit. There's a social ethos and the egalitarian principle at play in getting buses to communities to get people to work and to jobs and to help them live their lives. So in the COVID, post-COVID world, and with kind of the racialized and sociological overtone to it, from your perspective in your community, how is Riverside going to overcome the loss in revenues that are concomitant with COVID and all of the implications that might start to rise in terms of pulling back transit or reducing service?
So we've faced a lot of challenges with this pandemic. We were seeing an increase in ridership in the months before this happened. We were really excited. We were looking forward to hitting above the mark for the fiscal year, and then March happened and everything changed quite drastically for us. And ridership dropped about 75% almost immediately. And it's hard as a transit agency to even comprehend, because in Riverside County, the spread was quite high. The numbers were quite high. The county took a very strong approach, and actually the governor of California shut down the state essentially and told us not to go out unless it was essential. So we had to scale back. We're currently running a 7-day Sunday schedule. And we're starting to find that as things are opening up, people are starting to travel again. And we're starting to have to throw out some sweeper buses because we also have to meet social distancing guidelines on the bus, which means we can't pack them as full. You know, we love to run a Route 1 bus down Magnolia and Riverside and have it packed full, but right now we can't do that. So we're having to run buses behind to pick up people because we don't want to leave people behind. So it's challenged the way that we do service. It also makes us think about what would this look like from a zero emission standpoint. You know, would we be able to, would we have enough vehicles to throw out sweepers and be able to adjust accordingly, or how would we do that? So we've started to think about that. I think that moving forward for us, our biggest thing, well, first of all, I'm very proud of RTA and their commitment to the safety of the passengers and the coach operators. The changes that they've done were immediate. They reacted immediately to keep everyone safe. And it's been really impressive to watch our adjustments now, adjusting back to moving towards, you know, some sort of normal environment. Our biggest challenge right now is probably the schools. We have about 48% student ridership, and we've already heard from some of the colleges that they're not going to go back to classroom, you know, normal traditional type school in the fall. They're going to do online just to give some more time for everything to calm down with this pandemic. And so our ridership is going to suffer tremendously because of that. And when you couple that with sales tax and gas tax revenues being way, way down, it's going to take us a while, I think, to climb out of this. I think it's going to take us a while. And I think that responding to ridership as it shows up and being flexible and being able to serve as we see the need is really the only way that we're going to move forward and sort of climb out of this. I don't think putting everything back out is the answer at this point, at least not in our county, but I think a gradual climb out of it will be what we'll see.
So it's a perfect storm. I mean, it really is, right? It's socioeconomic, it's political, it's operational. Everything that could go wrong is going wrong right now. And Transit's being asked to keep delivering and even grow and become more complex technologically. I personally believe the industry is able to deliver on it because there's such great people, there's such great innovators. Nobody goes into transit not wanting to make the world a better place, right? Like you don't go into transit thinking, I want to pollute more, or I want to make congestion worse, or I want to ruin cities, right? Everybody's in transit because they want to make life better. So there's the right ethos and motivation. But given this perfect storm of circumstances and revenue losses, it leads to our next question around financing. And this is the penultimate question. We have one more after this, but on financing, new innovative financing models, new innovative funding models, even in the great good California where there's, we see it as a lot of money for green electrification. There's a limit to that. There are boundaries around that, and there's a future horizon where that stops. So is Riverside looking at new innovative funding financing models, new financing models altogether, new ways of actually making this stuff get out the door that are not dependent primarily on taxpayer funds available today?
I think that we're going to have to. I think moving forward, we're going to have to look at maybe some P3s and some partnerships to be able to deliver some of this. I don't think there's enough money out there right now. We're going to have to do something, coupled with the pandemic and the times being as they are right now, that's even going to slow down a lot of our state and local revenues for capital projects. We also have to divert any money that can be used for capital or operating is most likely going to go for operating for a few years until we come out of this. So, yeah, I think we're going to have to look at every option available. I also think that there's challenges with the programs that are out there. I know it seems like a lot, but a lot of the programs that the state offers, at least from vouchers and incentives and rebates, are overprescribed. They come out and they're all gone pretty quickly. And for us, we need to make sure that our board sets policy on what type of technology we're going to move forward with before we can even apply. So some of it's timing, but I think that resources are going to be challenging, and looking at innovative ways to partner, maybe partner with some of our universities and colleges as well, will be another option. So.
And that leads to a final question that's come through in a few different forms: modal shift, the benefits of merging electrification planning with modal shift, trying to get more people on your bus. Despite the current trend of social distancing, bus riders are fare payers, and fare payers help the system run. So what are the long-term plans, or are there parallel plans underway at Riverside to support modal shift into shared mobility that gets more people into your system while looking to electrify the system as well? For emissions perspective, from a social justice perspective, and also from a longevity perspective of the overall transit system. Modal shift compared to electrification, where do we stand on that?
So some of the things that we've been doing, we're going to do, we got some money from a greenhouse gas reduction grant. We're going to do fare-free program for youth 0 to 18 and college kids for this next school year. We're hoping that with the economy being how it is, that we can help students get to school and their families not to have to worry about purchasing bus passes. We're also hoping that it will help us recover. But how well the program does is kind of dependent on when schools open back up and when they start accepting students again. I think it will do well. I think that it will take some time to ramp up. But we're hoping that that helps us recapture some ridership. You know, it's hard at this exact moment to know how much to promote transit, because in California, we're still keeping it to more essential type services as much as possible. So there's kind of a fine line to walk, but RTA always likes to do programs like the one that I just mentioned to try to get more people onto our buses. We're also looking at new ways to partner on grant funding. We've partnered on some affordable housing funds with some of our member jurisdictions that includes free passes for all the residents, the future residents of the affordable housing complex. We're going to go and teach them how to ride transit, and then they're going to have free bus passes for 3 years. So we're looking at other ways to try to drive ridership and get people to start trying out public transit.
That's basically the newspaper subscription model, right? If you get people reading newspapers young, they'll be newspaper readers for life. Or in a less sanguine way, you know, if somebody starts smoking young, they'll smoke for life. It's kind of like the addictive positive side of things, not the smoking side, but the newspaper side, trying to get people in the system so that they never get off of it. And, you know, there's been some really great analyses done here in trials in Kingston and other cities in Canada where it shows, you know, get young people onto the bus, they're not afraid of it, and their parents aren't afraid of it. And that's the critical thing, parents being afraid of sending their children on the bus. And if you can get that young, then it lasts for a lifetime. And boy, is that a long way with a longevity in terms of our low carbon economy. So Kristen, it's been a great pleasure. And what I'd like to ask is that maybe just as last words in our last minute, what advice would you give, having gone through all this modeling and all this feasibility planning and all the changes in thinking that it has led to at Riverside with all the experience you have, what advice would you give to the transit agencies in the US, in Canada and Europe that are still at the early stages of thinking about electrification and they're not mandated, say, by their state to do so? What advice would you offer?
I would say that you need to study it early and study it thoroughly. We have learned a tremendous amount about all the things that go into going zero emission, all of the factors that go into how far a bus can run and what that looks like in your current system and what your future system could look like. You know, we're looking at doing some rerouting and looking at our system and making it more efficient as well. And that's all come from this. So I would say that even if we didn't have to go zero emission, I think that a lot of the lessons that we've learned from this study will be lessons that will help us moving forward with our operations.
Kristen, thank you so much for your insights. I think those are great words to end by. Kristen Warszynski, Director of Planning at Riverside Transit Agency. Thank you again for your insights and for your time. We look forward to continuing the relationship with your agency and certainly with agencies in California. It's a brave new world and we all have a lot to learn from these communities that are going boldly into the future and teaching us so much about how we can do it better around the world. Thanks again, Kristen. Have a great afternoon. And I look